So this is kind of an introduction to a very long tractor story. And as a matter of fact, when we put this together, I might, in case I don't edit it out, I think I said on the very first one, we're here with Sig Weiss. But I'm with Sig Weiss and kind of one of the founding partners of MDMA and Tractor Central. And the reason this video is so long is we're talking a career in the farm equipment business that's over 70 years at this point. You started in 1953, so we're covering everything. We talked about the transition or guys fabricating their horse-drawn equipment to go behind tractors to autonomous technology today and everything in between. So it's a long video, and maybe you'll want to pause it and start it, but there's no dead silence. There's no time we ran out of anything to talk about. We could have went for another 3 hours, pretty easy. So I hope you guys really like this one. And for the younger people that don't know it, we're starting with the John Deere company when it was maybe number 2. Maybe it was the number 2 company they were the underdog. Deere was the underdog in so that's the point where we're starting. We're 2 cylinders. The only 6-cylinder tractor they were selling is if it had a 4-cylinder pony motor on it, Well, I guess the 80-20 was out, but you never sold any 80-20s out of Mondovi or Durand. So, yeah, it's a long video, but I think you guys will really enjoy it. And I don't think you have to be a John Deere guy, because this is farming and farm equipment history, period. There's just, it's the story of the growth of a family business and a company. I mean, the company Deere has changed so much in that 70-some years that I think you guys will really like it. And hopefully you're patient and can sit through it all, because I enjoyed doing this all. Even if you guys can't make it through it all, I sure enjoyed talking about all this stuff. So, so buckle up, I guess, and I hope you enjoy it as much as we enjoyed talking about this stuff. So, yeah. Anything you want to add before they start listening, Sig?
Well, the only thing I'd add, Ryan, you say it's going to be long. That's only a fraction of what we could talk about. We could do a couple more 3 hours.
Yes. So.
But I just want to say I totally enjoyed it. This is reminiscing to me of my life, because it's all I ever did is be in the farm equipment business outside of, I took 4 years off to serve Uncle Sam, but otherwise, and I can honestly say I enjoyed every minute.
That's good. All right. Well, you guys, I hope you enjoyed this one then. All right. All right. So for this Friday tractor story, I'm here with Sig Weiss, and Sig has a connection to a lot of the tractor stories we've done, because those tractors have been in and out of his dealership along the way. Just a couple of them that come to mind would be like Mike Reel's and Breck Sweeney's 2520 and Pat Green's 4000, Tom Milliron's 4000. Because Sig is a farmer, but he was he's retired now. But you were a John Deere dealer for how many years?
62.
62 years.
Yeah.
So you started in the business when?
I started in 1953 is when I actually got involved in this business, and it was actually quite by accident. It was because my dad, we had an old John Deere G on the farm, And this particular spring, it needed some work. And my dad took me back along with him back to the dealership and was going to book the work to be done. Well, it so happened they were they were busy, but at that time we didn't have crews of 10, 12. It was 3, 4. And so they were busy, and my dad stood there just a minute, and he looked at the dealer, which was Chuck Brenner, uh, and said, well, could my son bring the tractor in and work on it, and your people just coach him as he's doing this? Well, Chuck said, sure. Well, that's what happened. We got our tractor fixed. I fixed it. And incidentally, I was somewhat mechanically inclined since I was born, I guess. But anyhow, we got the tractor fixed and ready to go home. And I see Mr. Brenner talking to my dad. And pretty soon the two of them come over by me and said, would you like to come and help us out and work in the shop? And I looked at my dad, and he says, if you wanna, that's fine with him. And so from then on, I started working for him. And it wasn't being a salesman or anything like that. It was washing old shit spreaders and kind of the cleanup crew. But from that point on, I did work my way up into the parts department and the sales department, and actually eventually in 1959 is when they bought the Durand dealership, and they sent me down there to manage it. So I started managing it in 59, and that was, I've got pictures all over here, but I don't have a picture of that store when we bought it and took it over. It was downtown Durand, and it was all wood. It was an old wooden building, probably 100 years old. And when I say wood, the floors were wood, everything was. And they had a little coal stove in there to heat it. That's how antiquated it was.
So you were in Mondovi, and they purchased this Durand
Uh,
store.
but let's just back up a little bit to
Yep.
Mondovi. I'll tell you the values of these dealerships back then. There was a gentleman by the name of Ed Bloss. He owned that dealership, but he wanted out. And the two partners that bought him were Dennis Slusher, who later on in life became my father-in-law, and Chuck Brenner. Well, Chuck Brenner had a little business know-how, and Dennis grew up on a farm, and he knew something about farm equipment and stuff, and they had known each other all their lives, and they decided to buy it because he wanted to sell it that bad, but they paid $10,000 for the dealership, lock, stock, and barrel.
So that was the real
And
estate, the inventory. So that was the real estate, the inventory.
yes,
Wow.
and they didn't really have the cash, so they asked him how they could arrange to pay it, and he just says, "Pay me when you can." That's how trusting people were back then, and that's that's actually what happened. So, and the same thing just about happened in Durand. They bought that one for 20,000, and but that one, it was kind of interesting because this area was pretty much dominated by international harvester. We had a very strong international harvester dealer down here.
Kohler and those.
Yes, and the banker said, "You guys are crazy. You'll never make a go of it down here." And so did the manager of the Minneapolis branch of John Deere. They told us the same thing. I don't know, we probably couldn't hear them or something because we did it anyhow. And we may have struggled because when you got the H's and M's out there and we were trying to compete with the old two cylinders, A's and B's, but we just decided we're going to work with the customers. We're going to try to give them the service that we feel they should have. And there came a day when we became the dominant dealer in Durand. So,
Well, something happened in 1960 that changed everything for
oh
John
yes,
Deere. So,
yes. And you couldn't believe, though, how many dealers and even ourselves were a little bit skeptical about that major change in tractors. I mean, we were happy to know it was going to happen and that we were going to have something that we thought we could compete directly with International Harvester, and but it it turned out very well. I mean,
because you were competitive on the implement side,
oh yes,
but on the tractor side with the two cylinders, as good of a tractor as an A or a B or a G was,
uh,
they weren't a Farm All M.
but yet, you see, we used, I suppose, a little psychology because these old two-cylinder tractors, they had their proportion, the way they were built and where the weight was distributed on them. You know, there was a third was all the weight that was on the front end. Two-thirds of the weight was pretty much on the rear wheels. And of course, everybody thought with that little weight in the front end, the tractor'd be up in the air all the time when they got in a hard pull. But somehow or another, with the gearing that they had inside that tractor would actually, if you pitted an old G against an M International, it would, traction-wise, that old G would outpull that M. And so they had some features, and that's what we focused on, and we tried to demonstrate those things. And whether or not that was why we were successful or not, I can't say, but it worked. And but now when the new series, the new generation came out, we, after it was introduced, and we understood what it was, all the features it had, like wet brakes, power steering, and all that stuff. I mean, we were in seventh heaven. I mean, now we had a product that we felt we could conquer this area. And we kind of did that. I mean, it still didn't just come automatically. We had to demonstrate that new tractor, you know, time and time again to because it was so far advanced from what International had at that time. Uh, some of the customers weren't convinced that that really was for real, that, you know, that it wouldn't break down and all those things.
Well, so at the time when the 3010 and 4010 are out, IH had the 560.
Yep.
And the 560 had a lot of problems. Do you remember?
Yeah,
Because the rear ends were failing at first, right?
right. And of course, the one thing they always stuck up against us was that torque they had. You
Yep.
know, they could do their shifting, but then when we found out uh, that the torque going down a hill, like if they're hauling a wagon and stuff, there's no back hold
Yep.
on it.
Free,
It was
freewheel.
freewheeling. So, and I've always been taught this in selling. You've got to know your competition better than you know your own product, because then you don't necessarily, you never put somebody else's product down. But if you know they've got a weak point and you've got a strong point on that same level, that's what you really sell. And that that has been our philosophy for years. And so we probably ended up knowing as much about the 560, the 460, and all of those tractors as we did our own going through the years. But uh, it it was a revolution, and
How much did your market share, do you figure, when the new generation came out? When you went from selling like 30 series 2 cylinders to the new generation?
our market share with the old 2 cylinders, uh, it wouldn't surprise me if it would have been in the single digit numbers.
Really?
I mean, it was really bad. I mean,
But
there,
the implements, you probably, plows and discs and stuff,
oh yeah,
haying
that
equipment, you
stuff,
did well.
that was, there was no problem. The old 290 corn planter,
Yep.
you know, that was a 2 row. We sold hundreds of those. And then they finally got to the wheel discs, you know, the RWs and those. Same thing there. I mean, just like we talked a bit yesterday, the baler and corn planters
Yep.
were always something that stood out. And whether or not it was that we had something that much better, or maybe it was they just didn't have anything quite that good. I mean, and because we could convince customers that were die-hard red customers to buy that planter or baler, but you might just save your breath talking
Yeah.
tractors. I mean,
But when the 4010 and the 3010 came out, maybe bring that new disc or corn planter out with a 3010 or
well,
4010, and maybe they'll.
we did a lot of demonstrating, and because we knew unless we could put that new generation tractor right in their face, you know, let them get their
Yep.
hands on it, and uh, you know, because I mean, we converted a lot of uh, customers from red. But the other thing, we fought this Kohler's, the international dealer. Uh, he was one of these guys. You'd go in there and you'd need that machine and that machine, and you'd need parts and service throughout the year. He says, pay me in the fall when you harvest your. I mean, he was very trusting, and he would give people credit to no end. And so and we weren't in a position to do that. I
Yeah.
mean, we needed the cash flow in order to keep going. So we were battling just about every element of the business, but we still.
Well, and talking about financing, John Deere was always pretty strong. Corporate John Deere was pretty good about financing customers, weren't they?
Well, they were, and let me tell you a little bit about John Deere Finance, if I may.
Yeah.
Yeah, uh, John Deere Finance, when we first bought these, no, they were okay, but they weren't that strong. When they really came in strong, would have been in the late 60s and the 70s. And let me tell you the story quick on John Deere financing. Uh, the Wisconsin Implement Dealers Association had a gentleman that was a secretary for the association by the name of Marvin Stanky. And he was always very progressive. And my father-in-law, Dennis Lusher, was on the board of directors at that time, working with Marv and the other board members. And Marv come up with a plan. He got to work with the banks. And you remember John Deere Finance was Farm Plan at one time.
Yep.
Okay. Well, this Marv Stanky developed that system, but it was very crude and awkward to work with because he would get an agreement with a bank in that dealership's area, and that's how they'd work the finances. It would be through a bank, and like I say, it was very awkward, but it was successful. Customers liked it, and Dennis was on there on the board. He was president at the time, and they got that developed with so many dealers that they had to make a decision, and that was they either had to go gung-ho and really get involved in it and finalize it to where it was easy to work with. Well, it was decided that by their board, when Dennis was on there, that really they need to pay attention to the marketing end of the business, probably more than the financing. Okay, so they decided they were going to sell it. Well, then Dennis's term got up. I got on the board. I became president, and I worked with the board and the association during the time period when we actually sold that farm plan to John Deere for $1 million. I can remember that very much. And of course, then John Deere kept it on as farm plan for years, but now it's gotten gobbled up by their total finance. I mean, it developed into their total finance business. It is John Deere Finance now,
Yep.
and that's all included in there now. So I was, very involved, and so was my father-in-law during the development of that.
So Farm Plan was actually developed in Wisconsin.
Pardon?
So Farm Plan was actually born in Wisconsin.
Oh yes, with
Huh.
the Wisconsin Farm Equipment Association of Wisconsin.
Well, and I remember before Farm Plan was all, because Durand Implement had in-house accounts too, right? Like
Yep, yep.
farmers
Yeah,
had a
at first
Durand Implement
it
account.
was so spontaneous here or there. We still had our open accounts. Yep,
Yep.
yep,
Okay. Because
yep,
I remember that we could
yeah,
just get a part, and it was, Dad
yep,
just had an account, and a statement
yep,
would come in the mail.
yep. Because I can remember a couple of our big customers even back then, uh, like the Von Holtons in Plum City and the Steyers, which is now Alpha Lawn up here. They were skeptical about going over to farm plant. So I told them, I said, you try it for 6 months. If you don't like it, we'll put you back on an open account.
Yeah.
And because what was so good for us, I mean, it helped our cash flow because otherwise accounts receivable were killing us. I
Yeah.
mean, first of all, there's a certain percentage that didn't pay on
Yep.
time, and there's a certain percentage that tried not to pay at all. So it we spent a lot of time managing accounts receivable, trying to collect them, and all that stuff. And when we finally got uh, this farm plan really all streamlined, that was a real godsend to us. Yep.
I could imagine because the amount of, well, and this area at the time was very dairy,
Yep.
right? So your cash flow would fluctuate probably with the milk prices the same way the farmer would,
Oh
because
yes.
poor milk prices, he's maybe not keeping up with the account the way that, when milk prices were good.
Correct.
And this way, at least, maybe you wouldn't be selling the hay equipment you would if the milk prices were good, but at least you were getting paid no matter what. You
That's
were
right.
okay.
Yep. Yep. So yeah. So there's been a lot of call them advancements or whatever in our business, but back to Durand then again. We like I said in '59 is when I came down to manage it, and uh, that old store we actually worked out of it. We we had an artesian well right in our back, one of the storage rooms back there down at that place. But because it went from the street in the front, it was a block deep. I mean,
Oh,
from one end of the street to the next street, and but we added on a couple of sections to do service work on, and we did some remodeling inside. But we never did replace the floors, but they were always wooden floors. Why we never burned it down, I don't know.
I can't imagine running a cutting torch with all that fuel and
Right.
oil stained in the wood.
Yep. And so it was 1976 that we
Built the new
built
store.
the new building. We had bought part of that land prior to that, and we had built the warehouse that's there. I suppose almost a half a dozen years before we actually built our total building. Yeah. So in '76 is when we built that. But the old additions that we put on new at the old building, a gentleman from Chippewa, because Northern States, it wasn't XL at that time, it was Northern States, bought those buildings. and they moved them about 2 blocks from where our store was, and they're still, I mean, they've got them fixed up now. XL uses them. They've got their station down here, and those buildings are still down there. And I can remember when they moved him. This guy from Chippewa, he knew what he was doing, but he was mean with his guys. He was cussing and swearing, because they just raised it up and actually moved them right up there.
Well, you were so the small building with wood floors. You were still was. Did you have 7,700 combines?
We had, we sold very few 77. 66 was our,
Yep.
but you talk about combines. We got started in combines and ended up dominating the combine business because Dennis and his brother, because his brother farmed right across the road from him, they decided to buy a couple of 55s
Yep.
and do custom work. Well, those old 55s, you couldn't hurt them. They were simple. They'd run and run and run. And, you know, and they'd get on so many farms doing their custom combining, and people would start asking about them. We sold a ton of those old 55s. And they were, like I say, what really got us into the combine business. But then when the 6600 come out, that one really put us through the roof, because that was, you know, it had so many features on it.
Well, and they offered a side hill.
Pardon?
They offered a side hill,
Oh yeah,
which this is side hill country.
yes it is. Between this store and our Arcadia store, Arcadia is worse than this is as far as hills, but yeah, and but yeah, and when well, the first year the side hill I wasn't there, and but once that was available, we just, because I don't know if you ever remember got involved in an old threshing crew.
No.
Okay, well, that's the way we used to harvest our grain when
Yep.
I was a kid. Okay, you'd have probably 6 or 8 or 10 farmers that would help together, and
Yep.
one guy would have the threshing machine. He'd bring that, and they'd call him the thresher man. And they were so fussy. They'd take a level out there. They'd get that machine set with a level. And so when the combines come, people thought everybody, the companies were crazy to think that a combine going over uneven ground could ever combine.
Yeah.
And, but, and then of course that's when the side hill, when that came in, that really caught the eye of a lot of people. And yes, we sold a bunch of those. And
But you were working on them in that old shop in Durand.
oh yes,
Wow. Wow, that was.
and but I don't know. It just seems when you talk about something like that, you know, working on them in an old shop, if there's a will, there's a way. I mean, we got the job done. We kept the customers happy through service.
Yeah.
And it's, and I guess we were always told I could name you a dozen customers that told me to my face they'd use some not so nice words and say, blah, blah, Sig, you're always so doggone high priced. And then they'd pause, but they said, you take care of us. You give us service. So eventually, price wasn't the real object. I mean, it was, and the other thing we learned, you don't sell this product. You help your customer buy what fits his needs and do the job that he wants to do. And because you could, there's things I know we could have sold that probably weren't totally applicable to the situation, and but in your heart you knew that isn't what you should sell that customer. And so we always tried just to work with them, find out what they want to do and how they want to do it, because it's so strange. I can also remember when the chisel plow started coming in, when
Yep.
conservation. Okay, honest to gosh, we had customers come in and tell us, I want to buy a chisel plow today. And we'd ask them, what are you going to do with it? I'm not sure, but I want a chisel plow, because that was what everybody was buying.
Yep.
And it so we weren't only dealers, we were educators, teachers, and all those things, because and we had to find some of these things out, the who's and why's, and because agriculture has been a changing thing for, well, I can testify to at least 70 years.
Yeah.
I mean, of all the changes, and they've all been progressive changes. And what we've got today is, you'd almost have to say, astronomical. Yeah.
Well, you probably still dealt with customers, not Amish people, but customers that were still farming with horses in 1953.
Yes. Yes. And prior to that, as I was growing up, like I told you, I helped on the farm, and I raked a lot of hay with horses, mowed it with an old 5-foot pull type with a team of horses, and that the first transition from horses to tractors was, you always took that old horse machinery and you cut the tongue off and you put a clevis on there and hooked it behind the tractor. And that was a big step up from sitting looking at the back end of a horse all day. So,
Did you have to deal with horses for trade-ins?
no, not, not we didn't. But the former owner of the Arcadia store, old Emil, oh, I can't say his last name now, but they would jockey horses and stuff. But
Well, I think Julius Hooper, they said, had to deal with horses some, I think.
pardon?
I think they said Julius Hooper even had a farm where he would put horses, I
I
thought.
wouldn't doubt it.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, because, well, the horse was still a pretty valuable animal at that time, and like you say, there were people that used them for some purpose or another, all the way into the early 50s.
Yeah. Well, and I'll ask about this real quick, but you said your dad had a G.
Yep.
There weren't a lot of G's around, were there? That was a big tractor.
Oh, that was a big tractor, and it was an open front, an unstyled.
Oh, it was an unstyled G.
Oh yeah, and 4-speed is all
Yep.
it had, and believe me, you had to open the pedcogs to try to start it.
That was a big engine. I think that engine is probably dang near as big as a 4020 engine,
Right, but I think it probably produced somewhere between 20 and 30 horsepower. And that's one thing I've never figured out, how they measure horsepower. The reason I say that, that old G had, let's say it had 30 horsepower. Now, I buy a compact tractor that's got 40 or 50 horsepower, so they claim.
Yep.
But that little 50 horse sure won't do what that G would have done.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
So, did you guys sell many G's?
no A's,
A lot of B's.
a
Right?
lot of B's, and A's were, I'd say, the biggest seller as far as the top end.
Yep.
We sold very few G's. Of course, then they eventually graduated to the 50, 60, and 70.
Yep.
And we sold a few 70s.
Did people like the diesel? Because that was the first row crop diesel.
Yes.
Because
yes.
you probably didn't sell a lot of R's, I would
No,
guess.
the only R, the only R we ever sold, Chuck Brenner from the store at Mondovi, and it was, some of these units were on allocation, for
Yep.
whatever reason. For whatever reason, Mondovi was allocated an R. Well, we had absolutely no use for an R. We wouldn't sell. Somehow he found somebody out in South Dakota that he sold it to.
Really?
Yes. But, yeah, well, you talk about the 70s and the 720, 730 diesels. They were the most efficient
Yes.
diesel ever built. They probably still hold the record.
I think, if I remember right, the record held until the 80s or 90s. And then, but it didn't get beat by much. Horsepower hours per gallon.
Yeah.
They stood for. So were you able to pick up a little bit of market share with the 2-cylinder diesel?
Certain operators, yes. Once we found out how efficient they are, there were people that we sold them to would report back to us that they'd run these things on a half a gallon an hour average.
Yep, like if you were planting corn or something, they just didn't drink
Right.
any fuel.
Right. And so, and then, of course, back then, to start a diesel engine in cold weather was always a problem. I mean,
Yep.
unless you shot it full of ether, and that wasn't good for the engine. But these old 2-cylinders, if you had what was called the pony
Yep.
engine start, that was cooled with the liquid in the big engine. So you just start that little engine, let it run for half an hour, and that baby would be all warmed up, and crank it over and it popped right off. So,
What I was always told in cold weather, because I have a 720 diesel,
okay.
was let them run, fill the pony up with gas, because the pony's always out of gas.
Yeah.
That little tank,
Yeah.
They said, fill the pony up with gas, start it, let her run until it runs out of gas,
Okay.
fill it back up, and then she should start.
Oh, yes. No.
Because like the 730 diesel was a pretty loved tractor. The guys that had 730
Oh,
diesels,
yeah. They were pretty refined by that time, and of course, uh, they eventually went to the electric start and
yeah,
made it very easy to.
because technically the 3010 replaced the 730 diesel,
Yeah.
but a 3010 would have a hard time out pulling a 730 diesel,
Oh,
wouldn't it?
yes. Yeah. I mean, that 730 there wasn't much that could stop that.
Yeah,
It was,
and
yeah.
they'd almost hang with a 4010. Maybe not
I
quite, but close.
I would say if you were going to match them up for field work, yes.
Yeah,
And of course, then we start talking about PTO work.
yep,
And they were okay, they were good, but they weren't as smooth.
no,
I can remember one customer, he actually had an old Fox chopper, and he had a I don't know if it was 720 or 730, and he was having problems with the drive line and stuff, and I told him to try a 4020. Well, he looked at me like I was crazy. That much more power, but that much bigger track. He says, I'll blow this chopper up. I said, I don't think so. And because of the smooth power out of that 4020, he had twice the chopper that he thought he had. I mean, it
yep.
just, yeah.
So, and just that had a Fox chopper. Did you ever sell Fox?
No, no, but we sold against him.
Because you sold Gale and Deere, right?
Yes. Well, and at one time, see, we actually had the New Holland contract at Mondovi.
And Ellsworth.
Right. But by that time, we didn't at Mondovi anymore when we started up
Yep.
in Ellsworth.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
Because, see, our first involvement up at Ellsworth, that I don't know what's there now for sure, a little building not far from Jack Hines' house.
yep.
See, we had D-Lavelle milking equipment up there. That was
Oh.
Durand Implement had that up there.
Because you sold De La Velle out of Mondovi, too.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
So, and you know, I would never want to sell milking equipment. I'd, I'd sell old dirty manure spreaders before that.
So we were talking about selling dairy equipment and selling short line stuff. So in the beginning for short lines, you guys sold New Holland and Gale. When did you pick up New Holland in Mondovi?
Oh, that was there actually when we bought the business. It was John Deere and New Holland
Okay.
and D. Lavelle. Those were their three major lines.
And Durand was just Deere.
Durand was just John Deere. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So then when did you add Gale? Because over the years you had Gale, H&S.
Well, H&S and Myers, those kind of thing, companies, we call them the short lines. I don't know really when we picked those up. Gale, we didn't pick up Gale till we were up here in
Okay.
our new building. And that was, at that time, probably the biggest reason we picked up Gale was for the skid loaders. See, John Deere originally built their own skid loaders. They built a 60 and a 70.
Okay.
And then, for whatever reason, they had Owatonna.
Yeah, OMC
Yep.
Mustang.
Then they had New Holland build them.
Yep.
So then they made the biggest mistake they ever made. Down in Tennessee, they built a brand new manufacturing facility just for skid loaders. Okay?
Yep.
State of the art. They hired people from other companies that supposedly really knew the business, and they went into production. They told us about this. It took about 3 years from the time they told us what they were doing until they got the factory all built and everything. But they had the people they hired were not John Deere orientated. They didn't have the John Deere philosophy. They didn't have the John Deere dedication. And their first product, we had some major problems. We'd get a semi-load of skid loaders in, and we'd have pump failures on them before we got them off the semi, just cranking them up.
Ooh.
And they were the 340 and the 360s. And but the strange part about it was Deere fixed them all, refurbished them, whatever you want to call it, and those things are still out there today running now that they're upgraded to where they should have been.
Yep.
But anyhow, that factory was not successful. They shut it down. They moved the production back down to Dubuque, part of the industrial manufacturing plant.
Because they always made loaders in Dubuque too, right? Like the tractor loaders and stuff were
Yep.
Dubuque.
Yep. And well, and in Dubuque, they used to also make what we called them utility tractors, like 1010s, 2010s, and but now the tractor business is all at Waterloo.
And then the utility tractors are Mannheim, Germany, right?
Pardon?
Then the utility tractors are in Germany. The
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
sixes and
Yep. They're all, and so that was where the skid loader business.
Gale had a good skid loader.
Old Gale had their reputation, and I mean, they had sold skid loaders for so long they had them all over, and of course, chopper boxes was another one.
They, was Gale probably your best selling feed mill?
Pardon?
Was Gale probably the best selling feed mill you had?
Oh, yes, that was a good selling feed mill, but we also sold the farmhand
Oh,
and Deere. Actually, the feed mill, the grinder mixer they had was very good. I mean, it had some features that the other ones didn't, but
don't see a lot of the Deere grinder mixers.
no, I think because Gale and even like Farmhand was a very popular name at that time, because they had such a strong numbers out there already that we didn't really push that hard to convert people to Deere when there was an alternate, and we knew it was a good product. So
Was there a what was the Gale cheaper, the farmhand cheaper than going with a Deere too?
it was, yeah, it was a little cheaper than the Deere, but
Did you guys sell Bearcat?
Yes, we sold that also.
Yeah. I'd love to know the history of Bearcat farm equipment. Because you see a few Bearcats,
Yep,
and
yep,
because they sold feed mills and then roller mills,
yep,
and then they did green choppers of all things. You'd see some Bearcat
yep.
for or
Yes,
green
yes,
choppers, foil
yes,
choppers.
yes. Oh, but we didn't get very heavy in it. But well, back then you didn't need a contract. These short lines would basically sell to anybody that wanted to sell their product, and if they thought they were could do a good job, they'd even some of them would bring this stuff in on consignment. You paid for it when you sold it. So
Really?
yeah, it everybody was hungry for business. We got to remember when there were dairy farmers every which way, there were short line companies every which way also.
Yeah.
Lots of them. Yep. Yeah.
So let's go back. You moved to the new building. Even before that, so combines, when the new generation combines came out, that really took off.
Yes.
Do you remember? So you probably never sold any 5010s or 5020s, right?
No. No.
When the side consoles came out and they introduced the 4520 with, because you did sell a 4520, didn't you?
We sold some 4520s. The biggest drawback on those, they only had 1,000 RPM PTO,
Yep.
and that was kind of before a lot of the PTO equipment was 1,000 RPM,
Yep.
and so, but that old 4520, it wasn't that much more of a tractor. I mean, it was heavy. It was a big piece of cast iron,
Yep.
and it was, but
Were before the 4520, were you putting M&W kits on 4020s for customers?
we did very few of that. Even I'd say that we didn't put 1 in 20 on. You know, the, we just figured, I don't know, our philosophy was so much that if that engine or if that machine would have been designed for more power and stuff, the company would have did it.
Yeah.
And so we were a little bit shy about jacking them up and trying to get all the horsepower we could.
But then when in 71, when the 4320 came out,
Yep.
did you sell some 4320s?
Yes, we did.
Those were a home run for this area, wouldn't they? Because they were dual PTO.
Yep. Yep. They were, and I'm trying to think. There was there was something about the 4320, and I can't think of it right now, that made it not totally desirable. But I'd say 95% of it was a real nice tractor, and it was a size of tractor uh, that was very maneuverable, and they could use it for small work, big work, and everything. So,
And the 4320 kind of carried on with the 4430 into the 4440, the 50.
yes, yes,
And so 1970, the fall of 72 rolls around. By So what point did you start to go from an employee to getting some ownership into the dealership?
That's when I came to Durand and they told me I was going to manage uh, the store. They also allowed me to buy some stock,
Okay.
and that's when I started to get involved.
So then, when the did you start to get to go to some of the dealer introductions?
Oh, I went to some, yes. Uh, Not so many way back then, but after uh, the 60s,
Did you get? Were you there when they introduced the sound guard cab?
no,
You
no.
didn't get to see it.
See, that's when Dennis, my father, my future father-in-law, uh, still was going to all the big introductions.
Okay. So the first time you saw a sound guard cab was that? What'd you think of that?
Well, I guess I was uh, kind of awed. I mean, uh, it almost looked like something out of the space era, because
Yep.
it had nice curves and uh, but once once having the opportunity to get in there and operate that tractor, I mean, I I started shaking my head yes before I got out.
Yeah. That I mean, because before that, the factory cabs on the 20 series weren't any better than a year around or a Hinneker.
You're right, because we didn't sell very many factory cabs, but a few 4020s we did, and you're so right. They really weren't much better than uh, the, the year round. And we put quite a few year round cabs on, uh, not just John Deere tractors, we actually put them on other tractors, but back then it seemed like noise wasn't a big factor. I wish I'd have thought different because I got, uh, yeah, well, you talk about noise for criminy sakes. We'd take the mufflers off and put straight pipes on them so they'd make more noise.
Yeah. Yeah. That.
Yeah, but
So you were a year-round dealer then too.
yes.
Okay. So then that sound guard comes out. Did you sell a lot of 4430s?
No.
They were almost too big for our area, weren't they?
Well, they were too big, too quick for us. I mean, we still had at that time, we still had 20 and 30 uh, cow farms,
Yep.
little farms. So they did, yeah, the need was not there yet. And so,
You sold quite a few 4230s though, didn't you?
oh yeah, that was a good tractor for us, a very good tractor. And, but then, we finally evolved into like the 72s or 7200s. Uh, that was that was a nice size tractor because uh, they could do work with that,
Yep.
or they could use it as a chore tractor.
Yep.
Just uh, yeah.
So other things like when you probably so the business has changed, but when you were selling was hay and forage equipment probably 50% of your business?
Yeah, because the corn crop, uh, they didn't raise that much corn. I mean, they didn't raise corn to sell. They raised
It was for
just
feed.
enough corn for their feed.
Yep.
And so haying was, yeah, I mean, balers, and of course, balers, uh, there again, we sold tons and tons of those. But you had to have somebody that service people that understood the balers and that they were available day or night or Sunday or Saturday. Because if they had a problem with a baler, they wanted it
Oh yeah.
fixed right now.
Yep.
And that's what we did. We thought that was the normal way of living, working all day long and half the night. And
That's because
we,
that's what your customers did.
right, right. So, no, but yeah, balers and diggers. That old John Deere digger. I can't even say the name of it now. They're,
CCA.
yeah, that first one. Sold tons of those and uh, until, and they always plugged up so easy because the
Yep.
spacings
Chisel
were,
plows made those so you couldn't even use them anymore. I
yeah,
mean, because yeah, when everybody moldboard plowed, your 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 tillage wasn't that big of a deal because all the trash was underneath the ground then.
yep.
Where then chisel plows come out and suddenly there were a whole bunch of problems that no one figured they'd realize they had till they got a chisel
Well,
plow.
that's right, yeah. Yeah, because you're right. A lot of them, you know, thought they wanted a bigger one than we were trying to sell them, didn't understand what it took to pull them.
Yeah.
And by that time, we got to remember nobody even thought or talked about the hard pan in our ground,
Yep.
you know, because that moldboard plowing uh, developed a hard pan to no end. And if you only plowed about 8 inches deep or 6 inches, which a lot of them did,
Yep.
because we got light soil around here, uh, then they get out there with a chisel plow and they want to go 8, 10 inches deep. They hit that hard pan, and that's like going through a field of rock. And to
Yeah.
break that up, it's, yeah, because I can, you know, uh, and so many people told us, well, you can't get hard pan on sand. I mean, and I can remember one of my customers, our customers, Ron Hulbert, down south of Durand, Sand Prairie, had a field day. And we were out there, and it was chisel plowing and showing people where the hard pan was. And we'd take our prod, and in the sand, you'd go in there about 6 inches deep, you know, and it'd go right in. And then you'd hit that hard pan, and it would be hard, even on a sand prairie. So uh, that was because one of the biggest concerns eventually was the compaction of the soil as we tilled it, whether it was chisel plowing, no-till, or what.
Yep.
And so, and that's where the track tractors, you know, they evolved, and uh, their claim to fame was that
Less.
there was very little compaction there. And but
Did so tillage wise, did you have any other brands besides Deere? Did you ever sell Glencoe or Kiwani? You sold Kiwani, didn't you?
no, I don't think so. Not to my knowledge. Uh, Tillage wise, and other brands, because Tillage, there again, when once John Deere come with that AW disc harrow, uh, we we cornered the market on that too again. And sometimes some of the simple things are the easiest to sell. See, those discs all had, their bearings were what we call the spools were made out of white iron. And if you could stand the squealing and the squeaking, don't worry about greasing it ever. It would wear one way or the other just as well. But it would squeak if you didn't grease it because
Yeah.
the sand would get in there. I mean, it was little things like that. The RW, the only problem we had with that, it was not adjustable. The gangs were set at a certain
Yep.
angle, and then the AW, that was kind of a flexible one that you could set the angles on them.
Yep.
And but yeah, between the discs, the diggers, and the planters, and the balers, uh, that was a big portion of our business back then.
So you guys started with Mondovi, then got Durand. So when did Menominee and Arcadia come along?
Well, okay, uh, before we go from Durand, like I said, in '76, we moved out here then.
Yep.
And we started doing business there. And incidentally, uh, one of your Ellsworthians up there supplied our meat for our open house. Jim Hubert, the cattle
Yep.
jockey out there.
Yep.
Well, that year we had planned open house in, I think, March or something. But New Year's Day, he's gone now, another buddy of mine, Bert Kukowski, and had a New Year's Eve party. And he was a good friend of Jim up there, and Jim was there. And we got talking about the open house. And of course, after you have a few New Year drinks, your mouth starts saying things you shouldn't. But we got talking about what we were going to serve, and Jim says, well, why don't you serve buffalo meat? I says, well, get me one and I will. Just not even thinking. Well, a day afterwards, I got a call from Jim. I got you that buffalo. And he did. We brought it down to the locker plant here and they processed it. But that was way back when, I mean, very few people ate buffalo back then.
Yeah.
Now it's kind of commonplace, but it it just it was a highlight and just something different to talk about when we did it. So
Well, in '76, the farm economy is doing really well. You're probably selling all the tractors you can get from Deere, aren't you?
there were a lot of times back then that we definitely were on allocations. I
Yep.
mean, there were just so many we could get. Yes, I mean, those were good times because, but inventory, I can remember we'd go into spring, that warehouse down there would be full of like 40/20s. And customers would come in if they wanted to buy one. We'd take them over. They'd look at the options on them, and that was fun back then. I
Yeah.
mean, we had product, we had customers that wanted to buy, and yeah.
So the new building probably was that was a lot of money, I'm guessing, at the time.
Back then, I can remember when we built that, it cost us $500,000. And we were making a huge commitment back then.
Did Deere want you to have a different building? I'm guessing.
Well, I think they wanted us to have it, but I think they were still questioning whether or not it was feasible to have a dealership where we're at. And, we talked a bit about Ellsworth
Yes.
yesterday on the phone about uh, old Julius Hooper. See, after they closed that dealership, uh, Chuck Polfus from New Richmond built the dealership in Prescott.
Yeah, interstate, right?
Yeah. And so, and we never, I loved Chuck. I loved his dad, Clarence, but I could never trust either one. I mean, to keep their word. I mean, they were out to do business and to get business, and so, because he actually told his customers that he was closing that store. I think 2 years before he really did. He changed his mind. Why, I don't know. And doesn't make any difference, but so when they finally closed that, uh, I talked to John Deere, and that's when our offices were still all up in Minneapolis.
Yep, because there were different branch houses around the country
Yes,
back then.
and we did our business with Minneapolis, and back then I could name, I knew everybody personally up there, but uh, I asked our territory man first. I said, now that Polfus is closing that, I said, can I go up there and sell in that area? And they looked at me and said, if you can sell it, you're welcome to go up there and sell. They didn't allow me to say that was my territory yet, but they told me I could. I think they wanted to see if we could really service it the way they wanted to see it serviced. And but we've done a lot of business in that area.
Oh, all the way to Prescott and stuff. And north of that, even because you guys cross into Minnesota, especially even Wabasha,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Lake City.
Yeah.
So yeah, I had always wondered that because that's one thing that I've always thought about was I was told when Julius quit in Ellsworth that our area was technically
Yeah.
Polfus's territory, and but then you had some overlap in there with the New Holland dealership, which
Yep.
that probably was a little bit of an irritating point to them.
Well, but it was an irritating point to John Deere too.
I'm sure.
Yeah, because see, before we could consolidate with Coal Hills,
Yep.
that's why we left Ellsworth with the New Holland. That was a stipulation. We had to divest ourselves of New Holland,
Yep.
and
But there were John Deere parts that ended up at the New Holland dealership over the years that
oh yes, I and it was the thing about it was uh, it was some of the pretty high up in John Deere at that time. I don't know if you ever heard the name Neil Christensen. See, that would have been uh, that would have been his son ended up with New Richmond up there after Chuck. But Neil was, I don't know, he was corporate almost president. He was way up there. but he's from that area north of here. Uh, and another high up in the John Deere branch was Boyd Bartlett, and he lived up north from here. Uh, so we had a lot of people watching us when we were up there, and it was uh, they deliberately came into our store up there. Neil was involved in this and asked if they could get this or that John Deere part. And of course, when our people says, "Well, yeah, we got one back here," that's when the hit the fan. But we found a way around that too. We set a box outside and
Yeah.
delivered parts up there, and yeah, so we put it this way. We didn't always get along with John Deere, but we got along with him.
Yeah. That, of that, and speaking of like the merger and stuff, because I had heard rumors before the Coel merger to form Tractor Central. At one time, you guys were talking to like SEMA.
Oh, way before that, we were talking with New Richmond.
Really?
Oh, yeah. But there again, uh, see, this was all happening kind of when Baldwin, Stan Myers,
Yes. Yep.
uh, you know, and that was part of the whole deal. And Chuck was beaten around a little bit. And then as I did my investigating, I found out he already had a deal with Stan. And so,
Because they just closed. I mean, Meyer closed. They never uh, kept the Deere dealership open there.
well, no, that turned
So,
into a New Holland.
yeah, Value Implement ended up with
Yeah,
it.
and
So did Polfus's buy Stanley out?
no, it ended up that they didn't.
Oh,
And I don't know exactly what, because after we just, we talked, MDMA's board sat down and talked, and we just didn't feel like it was a good fit for us to merge with New Richmond. So we kind of just flipped the page over, and then we started watching coal hills up here and talking with them and their philosophies and uh, everything materialized to the point where we felt comfortable and they felt comfortable. And that's what it has to be. I mean, if, uh, and I don't know if you know the Coal Hills at all.
no.
No, very unique people also. I mean, uh, very good people, but they've got their own ways. They're strong-headed, but they get things done, and they take care of customers. And those were a lot of the elements, that we looked for also.
Did Deere, obviously Deere has pushed for consolidation. When did you first start hearing about that? That how far back does that go that they wanted you
Well,
to be multiple stores?
see, that's the other thing. Uh, Durand, way back in, it would have been 1986 or further back than that. Uh, Let me just think a little. Uh, But when Mondovi bought Durand, no, that ended up being 2 stores. That was the first time any dealer in the Minneapolis branch had more than 1 store.
Really?
And they thought, you guys are a little bit goofy and all of that. So we established the multi-dealership process way back when. Because, see, it would have been the early 60s we bought Menominee.
Okay.
So, and then, of course, we went from the 1 store to the 2 stores to the 3 stores, and then we ended up buying Arcadia. And
Was that quite a bit later?
yes, that was quite a bit. Banusa, Emil Banusa was the guy that owned that. And yeah, that was quite a bit later. And so,
So back to the new store. You got this new store, and it's 76, and I mean the farm economy is doing really, really good. I'm assuming you had to borrow money to build that store. You
oh
probably
yes, every penny. Because I can also remember the day the decision was made. I had an office in the back corner of that old wooden building, and I was back there doing something, and Dennis came back there to tell me, because by that time we'd already acquired Menominee, and they wanted to build a new building. And Dennis told me that they were going to build a new building. I slammed my hand on the table and I said a few choice words, and I said, "Why them? Why not us?" And he looked at me, "Well, go get the money and we'll build one." He made a statement. I did. I went out and found somebody to finance us.
he probably was thinking, you're not going to be able to do
I'm
it.
sure he was. So the job got done then. But yeah, and then the nominee was then, because we had, well, their original spot was, do you remember where, going into Menominee from the south,
Off of 25?
yeah, on 25, there's a laundromat there.
Yep.
Yeah, and another like a steel building with a gap in between. That's where our dealership was. The dealership originally, when we bought it, was all in a set of it. It was a steel Quonset hut. It was
That's
almost as bad as the working conditions were almost as bad as Durand when we bought it. Yeah.
so the 80s. So it's going real good, I'm assuming. Then interest rates are going up and farm equipment sales start going down in the 80s. Were you getting pretty nervous?
We had more iron than we had anything else, and no place to go with it.
And you're paying high interest
Yes,
on this. Did Deere give you guys a floor plan?
they did, but yes, I guess there was a type of floor plan for everything, new, used, and everything. But it was at a pretty stiff interest rate.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the 80s roll around, and I mean, tractor sales. I mean, the amount of 40 series you sold versus 50 series, there were a lot less 50 series ever got sold than 40 series.
Yep.
And was it the manure spreaders and the feed mills and that stuff that kind of kept things going?
Yep.
How about Were you starting to sell more lawn and garden?
Yes, we always did quite well. Mondovi was our biggest store for the lawn and garden, and but we also, and lawn and garden always was a profit center for us. I mean, for some reason, uh, even when we traded a lot of mowers in and out, we were able to make some money on it. And but again, when we got to Menominee, um, we were thinking that should have developed into our biggest lawn and garden
Right.
store, but it didn't. I mean, it was good, it was okay, but it just never took off like we thought it should. Being in the middle of,
A college town, a
yeah,
big.
college town and more people.
But you had a couple of big. Well, there was a couple of gorillas in that same market in Menominee at the time.
Oh yeah,
Probably, I mean, Richards at IH was pretty strong,
oh yeah.
but Lapine's were probably the biggest case dealer in the world, weren't they?
Yes, they were. Yes. Well, they claim they were, and they probably were.
Yeah.
I mean, old Tommy, I, I, I can remember. We used to get involved. I used to get involved, not physically tractor pull. Well, I did some, but most of the time it was as a spectator. But they'd have a tractor pull up in Menominee. Well, up at Ridgeland really is where it would start,
Yep.
because that's where, and old Tommy be standing there, and we'd be yelling and shaking our fingers. I mean, he was a character as well as I guess, person. I mean, I can't say anything bad. I mean, we had our fun, we did our thing, and
Well, there is a lot of case tractors
oh,
around Menominee. They
oh,
sold iron like.
yes, yep. I mean, that they did, and
Well, and speaking of lawn and garden and why it wasn't as good, why Menominee maybe wasn't as good in lawn and garden as you thought. My neighbor Leon Henneman, diehard cow guy. Tractors were only there just to. Leon never spent any extra money unless the cows needed it. Leon, whatever the cows needed, he had a case tractor, and he bought an old case tractor from old man Lapine, and he said he talked my neighbor into buying a brand new case lawnmower, and to get Leon to do that, Leon even says, I don't know how he did that, but
well, and see, when you when you talk about their lawnmower, uh, they had a lawnmower with big 16-inch wheels in the back and a tractor
yeah,
mower, and but that was all hydraulic drive, and way back then, uh, you know, nobody else had anything like it. So
yeah, they were a tractor.
yeah,
A
that's
small
yeah,
tractor is what.
yeah. But so
So yeah, so then now it's the 80s, and you're getting by on lawn and garden and feed mills and manure, because they always need feed mills and manure spreaders.
yep,
They're going to wear that out.
yep.
Probably selling hay and equipment, just because guys will wear the hay and equipment out. Did Was De La Velle then good to have? So at least in Mondovi to have the De La Velle, was that?
De La Velle was good for us, and it was profitable. I mean, I think it helped us uh, cover the storm a little bit.
Because the cows need to get milk no
Well,
matter what.
that's right. That's right. And but pretty soon technology came in there also,
Yeah.
And back then, to have service people and train them in this new technology, there were no places to send them to learn this new technology.
Yep.
I mean, the old mechanical things, they weren't any problem, but now they, I mean, it blows my mind. You get this $500,000 unit in your shop, and what does the serviceman go for? He doesn't go for his toolbox. He goes for his computer
Yeah.
to check it all out first. I mean,
Well, think of that whole room you used to have at Durand with the shop manuals in it, and now it's all on their laptop computer.
yeah.
I miss the paper manuals, which that was
I mean, here's the thing. We talk about people that work, the dedication, service people. I mean, they're, we're just about, we should actually get every one of our customers by the nose and bring them into the shop to show them what these units are made out of and what the technicians go through. When they have to tear one of these units apart, whether it's a chopper, combine, or tractor, and lay a transmission out on their work table, they've got 1,000 pieces laying there. And you've got to wonder, how are they ever going to get that back together?
yeah,
I mean, when you've got a good service technician that can do that, to me, they're worth all the gold in the world. I
yeah,
mean, it's, to me, it's unbelievable. Like I said early on, I'm mechanically inclined automatically, but I have no ability. I wouldn't be able to start tearing one of those apart. No how. I mean, it's, but they just, I mean, I go out there and watch them once in a while, and they're just working away like that's an everyday
yeah,
occurrence what they're doing. They do it so naturally. And that's, no, not that I say that the service department is the most valuable section of a dealership, but without that, you'd be nothing.
yeah.
I mean, it,
So you got the dairy, you got lawn and garden, feed mills, manure spreaders, and hay and equipment's keeping things going. Did you did you do a lot of the snowmobile business?
oh, yes.
Did they pay? Because you guys did Skidoo for a while too.
No,
Later on, right?
no, never had Skidoo. We had snow prints in Durand, that's all. And I, no, we never had Skidoo at any of our stores. That was our biggest competitor, wherever they were sold. But these old John Deeres, they came out with two models, the 400 and the 500.
Yep.
And what always sticks in my mind, we had a customer, Wayne Hartung was his name, only had one hand because he got it into a corn picker, but he bought a 400. And he was so proud one day he came in, he said, Sig, he says, I've got 10,000 miles on that thing. And he did. And that's before any trails. That's riding it across the fields and through the woods. And he says, I've never had a nickel's worth of problem with it. I mean, it was unreal. They were they were simple, but they were a tough machine. I mean,
So then, was it tough for you when they announced what '84 was the last year of snowmobiles?
yeah,
Were you guys sad to see that go.
With the snowmobiles going, no, that didn't hurt my feeling. That was, you know, those customers were more demanding than the guy with the lawnmower that needed to mow his lawn and it broke down.
Yeah.
I mean, a snowmobile was something, hey, tonight we were going on a ride with a group of people. We gotta have it, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, and you never quite knew what was going to go wrong with them, whether it would be the engine, the clutch, or the track, or the skis. No. But then, like you say, I forget why we took on snow prints. That
So,
was a Canadian-made snowmobile.
well, in 1996, I bought a Skidoo up here from you guys, from Nolan Andre.
Was it brand new?
Yep. Yep. I think you guys started selling them in like 91 or 92.
It could be. Yeah, because I don't, right now, I don't recollect that.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Yep. I remember getting it out of the snowmobile lawn and garden shop, the smaller
Yep,
one.
yep.
And yep, because I was a senior in high school and I had a brand new snowmobile, and I thought that was just neat, you know. But so the 80s come around, and I mean, basically you just kind of hunker down, didn't you? I mean,
Well, that's all we could do. We had to watch everything we did to get through this. We knew it was going to change. I mean, because this business will go in cycles.
yep,
And it's most of the time, it's it's almost 5 years from start to finish that these things go through cycles. And that holds true. I've watched that time and time again. And we kept telling ourselves, you know, it's going to get better. It's got to get better because people got to eat. We got to
yep.
produce food. So,
Well, and one of these days we're going to do a story with Randy Radel. But I think he said him and his dad bought the first 50 series you guys sold, a 4450 with power shift front wheel assist.
I think that would be correct. Yep.
And that was a big deal. He said he paid 18%, I think, interest at the time.
Oh, yeah, that was not uncommon to get interest rates up to there, and even higher than that. I can remember the Menominee store. We needed money up there. We went to the bank. Dennis was with me. We sat down with the banker and told him our story. He says, yeah, I'll give you some money, 21%.
Oh,
He said, take it or leave it. Just as casual as I could have strangled him, but I didn't. So,
well, and Randy said that was like when that 50 series came out, it was like you had an open house or something, which I remember the John Deere Day. I wish you guys still did John Deere Day.
yeah, yeah. I think there's a couple of things that dissolve that. You know, it used to be we really had something to show about once a year. New product normally came once a year from John Deere. Now there's change in this product every month throughout the year.
Yeah,
And
and there's less farmers than there was.
well, that's right. And the existing ones have got access to all this information as soon as it happens through our media.
Yep.
And most of the time, if they want to, the customer knows more about this machine when they come into our store than we do. because if they researched it, the information's out there. And because if our salesman even tried to remember all of the technicalities on all this equipment, they'd go crazy. They couldn't stand it. And what I'm saying, you could take something as simple as a corn planter. Well, the configuration you can put together to build a corn planter, it could be 50 different ways or even more.
Yeah.
You know, the way you apply fertilizer, insecticide, or the seed.
When
Uh,
and back years ago, you were ordering 7,000 4-row wides with dry fertilizer. That's you probably bought a lot of those for stock, didn't you?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Because you didn't wait for a customer to come and spec it out. I mean, yes, you're right. This is a 4-row corn planter. This is what it'll do. This is what it's
Yeah.
got, and sell it to them. But now, I mean, it's totally unreal. I mean, what kind of press wheels do you want? What kind of openers? What kind of fertilizer applicators, you
Yep.
know? And it's something. I mean, uh, something as simple as a corn planter, you'd never dream it could be that complicated. I mean, just to
Yeah.
put the corn in the ground out here, but it is.
Yeah.
And of course, you know, getting the corn the right depth so that your emergence is all equal or even. I mean, things like that. It's it. That's why maybe I feel good that I got old, because to learn all this new stuff.
Well, and maybe this is a good spot to end this video. We're gonna have to do another one, I think,
Yeah.
because we didn't even talk about getting into when things got better into the 90s with
No.
the Maximizer combine coming
Right.
out, and the
Right.
you know, or some of the other dealers that you did business with, and you know, I mean, because we'll have to talk about Stan Bowles and
Oh, yeah.
you know all the guys that you did all this business with. But this has been a pretty long video already. So
I have no idea how long you run them, or
I know it's pretty long because my battery is just about dead.
okay.
So I think
We'll quit.
we'll schedule another one. Maybe we'll do it as a two-parter, and
Sure.
if that'll work for you.
Oh, that'll be great. I need a reason to reminisce about some of these things. So,
Well, this history is going to be gone, and especially people think of John Deere. What's amazing about John Deere, and that you've seen this transition, is the way people look at John Deere today. It's this big giant corporation that's almost it's so much more than a farm equipment company. It's almost just an American part of our vocabulary. It's just people think of country and they think of John Deere.
yeah, yeah,
And when you started in this business, John Deere was the furthest thing from that. If there was a company that was dominant, it was International Harvester.
that's right.
John Deere, everybody thinks of John Deere as the big bad bully today, but they were the tiny little company.
Yeah, and I watched a documentary about John Deere the other night, and it went about their tractor business, because Ford dominated the tractor business at one time, and all of the things that John Deere tried and how they tried to design their own and all these things, and then they finally ended up buying the Waterloo boy
Yep.
to get them on the right track. But and I don't think a lot of people realize John Deere didn't get started with a tractor business. He got started with that plow.
Yep.
And so,
Yeah, and at one point they almost didn't get into tractors. They were just going to make implements
yep,
for.
that's right.
We'll make implements to fit the guys that want to build tractors, and what a mistake that would have been.
Yeah, yep.
Because the full line manufacturers, that's what kept Deere.
And that's not only what kept Deere going, John Deere is the only company that started out as John Deere and is still John Deere today.
Yeah,
All the other lines have either merged or sold out to other people. So that's a pretty, to me, that's a pretty big point in their favor. I
yeah,
mean, it's unbelievable that they could weather the storms that they encountered over their lifetime.
yeah,
And but they must have had some smart people even back then.
yeah.
And so
Yeah, I think we should do a second video in a week or two,
that'd be
and
fun.
we'll finish it up because otherwise it just gets too long.
Yeah,
But I'm really enjoying this, and there's still a lot left to talk about
yeah,
the history of this, because we should talk more about the merger and setting up to that. But
yeah.
definitely some of the old dealers, because even like the Prescott store, there was a couple of guys. Wasn't there hats that had that Elroy or something hats? Wasn't he into that?
He could have been involved with the Polfuses. I don't know,
Because
because when
well, and we'll talk about that, because even like Cannon Falls started up,
oh yeah,
and
yeah,
Harks and River Falls, and
yeah. Steve, Cannon Falls. That was owned by a guy by the name of Steve Bauer,
yep,
and I can remember the day he asked me if I wanted to partner up with him. I knew Steve real well, of course. And then he acquired that. I don't know what is it called, that Heritage Park out there.
oh yeah, Little Log House or whatever.
Well, have you ever been there?
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, what he's done there is unreal. You
yeah,
know, it's. But yeah, I knew Steve. We talked quite often, and then I'm trying to think, and I can't say the name from. There used to be a dealership at St. Charles, and
oh yeah.
and
There was one in Lake City too at one point,
oh
right?
yeah, there was one at Lake City. Sparks were their name in Lake City that owned it,
Yeah,
and but yeah, that whole area down there, uh, I know it. I know it quite well.
yeah, yeah. The overlap between Wisconsin and Minnesota
Yeah,
is
yeah.
so.
And you know, from Durand, if you jump in a car and drive to like Wabasha or Lake City, it isn't much farther than going to Eau Claire. But because it's in Minnesota, you say Minnesota and you think it's miles and miles away, but it's not. So
Yeah, I tell people always ask me when they say you're from Ellsworth, or and where we're at in Ellsworth, we're so close to the cities now, and people always ask about like Eau Claire or something, and I go, well, I can be in Minneapolis or St. Paul
I
long before I
know.
can be in Eau Claire.
Yeah. So
It's yeah, that's some interesting overlap,
yeah.
and the
Well, see, and for some reason, Plum City over here, there must be a line, an imaginary line, because a lot of people from Plum City work up in Minneapolis and St. Paul.
Yep.
They commute, and I don't know if it's the mileage that's the breaking line or if it just happened that way, but
Yeah, everybody east of it then would go to Eau Claire
yeah,
or Menominee or
yeah,
so.
yeah.
Yeah, because yeah, we got to talk about when things changed into the '90s and got modern and the change that you saw in the business because it didn't stay the same customers. It's not small dairies and
No,
what it was. So
yeah.
yeah, and talking about the Maximizer combine coming out and the 300 picker going away.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
so it's which you guys did sell New Idea too, didn't you?
Oh, yes.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, I could tell you stories about that because you know where Ella is?
Yep. Yep.
They,
They were Alice, right?
oh, yeah. They were the Andersons down there. Ellis Chalmers. And actually, at one time, we had 3 of the boys working for MDMA. And we still have one, Brian down at Durand, the service manager. He's
Yep.
and then there was Bruce. He works for this place up in Ridgeland, part of Synergy, but it's the machinery part. And then there's Jeff. He lives in Ella yet, but he went on his own. He married one of the Schmidtnick girls from Mondovi. So,
Oh,
but, well, and the one that, well, there's another one down in Ella, Dave. He's the logger, and he'll do tree trimming and different stuff, but his primary purposes or income is from logging.
yep.
Yep.
So, yeah, they were Alice. Well, you had Harmons and stuff you were competing against with
Oh, yeah.
Massey and well, and you had Alice in Elmwood to.
Oh, Joe Olson, yeah.
And they were. Steve Garrett's told me they were the biggest Alice dealer in the country at one time or something.
I can't verify that, but I wouldn't doubt it because they were all over. Yeah,
So
yep. And
there's a lot.
well, you know, back then there were almost as many dealers as there were little dairy farms.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you were competing against co-op selling machinery too. You had,
Yep.
because like the Ellsworth Farmers Union. So, and real quick before I end this, when we were talking about New Holland, because you guys had the New Holland dealership in Ellsworth,
Yeah.
and you got that because that was a New Holland company store for a while, wasn't it?
Yes. Up the road there.
Yep, because they had been, so originally New Holland was Snow's had New Holland and Ellsworth, right?
Yep.
And then the Farmers Union had sold New Holland
Yep.
for a while, didn't they?
Yep.
So Ronnie Snow got it after the Farmers Union,
Yeah.
and then New Holland had their own store,
Yeah.
and then you guys bought that store. Because did
'Cause
New
I-
Holland approach you guys and say, "Would you buy this?"
Yeah. Well, yeah, they talked to us about it, but the building didn't stand bulls
Own that.
end up owning it.
Yep.
Yep. That's
Because eventually you guys moved out, which it was a better location for you guys to move where the old Hoyka or Julian Walsingham was.
for what the customers we already had established, where we ended up right in Ellsworth
Yep.
was better. Yeah.
Because to me, living right just east of El, right there on the east side of town,
Yep.
to drive out to that location is miles wise, it's 3 times faster, 3 times longer to go to Durand, but by the time you drive through town and everything else, it's not that much further to just drive
Right.
to Durand than it was to.
Yep.
So once you guys moved to the location, the old Hoyka Julian Walsingham location, that was a really nice spot to be.
Yep. Yep. No, we enjoyed that, and of course we talked to Deere about getting the Deere franchise up there, but that didn't happen.
So did you have the opportunity to buy Julius's business?
No,
Okay.
no, because they were. I'm just trying to think. If that building was vacant for a while,
Well, the
well,
Army,
there was a Hoyka involved. Uh,
so the Julius Hooper building ended up with the National Guard.
yes,
And the Julian Walsingham building, Hoyka's bought Julian Walsingham's.
okay, they were after the Hoykas.
Nope. Julian Walsingham and then Hoyka's bought
Yeah, because he passed away, didn't he?
Kurt Hoyka.
Yeah, because we had a deal with Mrs. Hoyka.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah, because they were Case IH, and then after Kurt died, that was the end of Case IH
yeah,
there in Ellsworth. Because Julian Walsingham was a big international dealer back in the
yeah.
day. Because they were in Maiden Rock, too.
Yes, yeah,
So, but yeah, the Julius Hooper John Deere dealership, you never had a chance to buy that one. Because that was Midway Implement, right?
yeah, yeah. No, we never, for whatever reason, I'm just trying to think how that went, but no, we weren't ever offered that or had an opportunity there. No.
So yeah, technically the Ellsworth area was Polfus's territory.
Yep.
But you ended up with all of Julius's sons doing business with you guys. So
Oh yeah. And see,
and Julius's grandsons, you had Sheldon and
oh yeah. Well, and you talked about Leo the other day. His
yeah.
boy Lynn.
Yep.
Okay, I don't know if he's still flying. I think he is.
I think so.
But he came down here, and I've got pictures someplace or videos. But one year, I bought my wife for her birthday a ride in a balloon, and Lynn brought. He was doing that. He was
Yep.
and he came down here right out there in that spot and set it up, and I wouldn't have went up there no how, but my wife wanted, she was game to do that, and one daughter went with her, and they ended up on the south side of Durand out of town, and in my mind, I honestly don't know how much they can control those things, where they go, but he ended up landing on the road on the south side of, and of course we were all there. Drove down, watched them go, and
Yeah. Yep. So that was the Hooper boys did a lot of business with you guys
uh,
over the years.
yeah.
So you have a lot of customers that are multi-generations of.
Pardon?
You have a lot of customers that are many generations.
Oh
now.
yes, yes. Yeah. So it's. But see, one of Julius's daughter married a Rissler, Dick Rissler, and he had the white, the dealership up at Rusk.
Oh.
And so, yeah, he was a rascal to deal or to compete against also, but
Yeah, I bet it was fun though to.
well, it was. you'd you'd be mad for a half an hour because somebody beat you on a deal, but then you'd go to the next one and you'd forget. That was the thing. If you lost one deal, there were always two or three more waiting
Yep.
to sell to. Now, you're pretty touchy about how you treat your customers. You can't afford to lose one of these big ones.
Yeah.
I mean, but I was also going to tell you one other thing quick. When we first came to Durand, because Jackie has got the ledger, the first year we were down there selling parts, selling service, and selling machines, we did $369,000 worth of business. That's not even one tractor or one
Right.
combine today.
But I bet that was a lot of cash flow.
Well, it was, yeah,
That
but
that probably I bet the bank liked having those deposits.
yes,
So that's a
but
lot of money.
yeah, yeah,
But yeah, it is. Well, and we'll have to talk more about that as you went into the 90s. If the overhead that you have to deal with today is
well, yes,
because
yeah,
you probably have back then you had more money in real estate than you did in overhead, and today I bet you have more money in overhead than you do real
yes,
estate.
yes, yes, yep,
And that's staggering because for farmers, the vast majority of their, you know, net worth or assets is tied up in the real estate.
right, right.
And it's gotten to the point where you're so just the inventory, the parts inventory alone is probably could have bought every one of those dealerships back 40 years ago. Just the
Oh,
parts inventory you
oh,
have on hand.
absolutely, yeah, yeah. We used to talk in hundreds of dollars. Then we went to thousands. Then we went to 100,000. Now $1 million worth of parts is just almost like spitting in a spittoon. I mean, uh, it's peanuts compared to what, uh, yeah, we do. It's astronomical, the dollar amount of parts. And again, it's not that many parts piece-wise,
Yeah.
but if somebody has to rebuild a 12 or 24 row corn planter, years ago, what used to be put on a pair of new shoes in that drive chain, and you probably had $150 bill. Now it's probably 30 or 40,000 to rebuild the corn
Yeah.
planter. So uh, it's so different that
Yeah.
yeah,
Yep. So it's a different business, but
yeah.
you still enjoy it.
Oh yes, oh you know not that I'd want to, but if I could live my life over again, uh, I wouldn't change a thing of what happened so far, but I'd like to start over again, starting today with what we got. That would be just because today you can do so many things so much faster because of all the technology.
Yep.
Back then, well, when we talked about the A and Bs or the 50s and 60s, those units were exactly the same for probably up to 10 years.
Yep.
Even the parts guys didn't have to look anything in the book because they knew all the numbers of those
Yeah.
parts. And but now, uh, I mean, I talked about the service department, but the parts department's just as bad because a customer needs something for a unit that he's got, tractor, combine, chopper. Man, the model number doesn't mean much on its own. They've got to get the serial
Yeah.
numbers and all the way down the line in order to try to get the right part. I mean, it's
So when you were cutting the pole off of that horse-drawn equipment for a customer when he bought a tractor, did you ever think you'd be seeing the stuff you saw today?
no.
All right. Well, that's a good enough spot to end this one then. All right. Well, thanks, Sig.
Thank you. Thank you.
So now we're catching back up where we left off because we've got some time into this story, don't we?
For sure, Brian.
But how do you put 70 years into a couple hours, right?
Well, we're never going to quite get them all in.
No.
But like we briefly talked before, when you came here, if we could just go back to the Mondovi deal and talk about just a bit about the industrial end of how that transitioned out. We won't go into any detail, but just so people know that at one time, Deere had the ag and what they call their industrial all in one contract, which we had at the Mondovi store. And so in the late 50s, Deere wanted us to separate it, and some of the partners and other people formed a company in Eau Claire called Northwest Equipment, and that's where the John Deere Industrial started in this area. And there's people by the name of McCoy that own it now. So,
Which the Deere Industrial Division was kind of an interesting story in the fact that originally there was some friction there with Caterpillar because Cat had originally was kind of had made a deal with Deere where they gave them their combine, the pull type Holt combine or whatever back in the day, and Deere wasn't really going to do crawlers, but a lot of times you'd be a Caterpillar dealer and you could sell John Deere wheeled tractors because they really didn't cross each other.
right.
But then, a young guy by the name of Jesse Lindman started putting tracks on Deere tractors out in the out in Washington, the Pacific Northwest. And then Deere thought, well, those are pretty good, and I don't think Caterpillar was a big fan of them doing that.
Well, actually, how Deere, even before they got really started in the crawler side of it, the two items, at least this is what happened over at the Mondovi store, that they really worked with us on, and that was like the 420 tractor and loader, okay? The other item was they built that big 822 cylinder John Deere, and they hooked up with Hancock scrapers out of Texas.
Yep.
And combined them, and we had them out here and they demonstrate. The store at Mondovi never sold any of those because those were monsters for their days, for their time.
Yep. Well, and Deere's industrial equipment just basically evolved from their ag stuff. It wasn't.
Yes. It was just the paint that changed and a lot of stuff.
The AI and the DI and the BI, and so they were standard tread tractors that they just changed a few things, but that kind of led Deere into a niche that the other companies weren't really doing with small scrapers and small crawlers and stuff. So Deere just kind of got in there. It wasn't like they set out to take on Cat or anything.
No.
Where IH made a mistake IH was trying to do too many things at one time, and they really focused on their construction equipment.
Yeah.
And that hurt them, I think, in the end. where Deere's two things kind of worked with each other, sort
Yeah.
of. They were a synonymous relationship, or,
Yeah.
you know. So, but where I think we had kind of left off, we were talking about getting into the 80s with the new store. So you had a relatively new store at the time in what, 76 in
Yep.
Durand.
Pardon?
The Durand store was pretty new.
That was built in 76, but Menominee was built the same year,
Yep,
or 1 year apart.
yep.
Yeah.
So the 80s come around, and now you've got high interest rates on new facilities, and we talked that a lot of you didn't sell a ton of tractors in the 80s compared. It was the Shortlines and the lawnmowers, and
Okay.
so a lot of lawnmowers and short line and haying equipment through the 80s. The 50 series, though, was probably a fairly big deal because you got mechanical front and the 15-speed power shift and stuff, right? That was,
That, well, yeah, I would say that they were very good to us with all the new features and everything, and very well accepted by our customers by that time. And I guess by then, probably what pulled us through more than anything else would have been our service. I mean, we always focused on taking care of those customers, and even though we knew that they probably couldn't afford to buy at that time because of the economy and everything else,
yep,
but they we've got so many customers that were loyal to us that we're so thankful for over the years, and so we were told many times we were always too high priced, but they liked our service. And it proved out that was more important than the price of the product. I mean,
yep. So then, I kind of remember it like this. 88 helped kind of fix the farm economy, didn't it? You know,
yeah,
the drought of 88 kind of got rid of some of our excess commodities, and commodity prices improved. Things got a little bit better.
yeah.
So is, say, 1990s coming out, or 89, like when the 55 series are coming out, were you optimistic?
We we always stayed optimistic. We had to. I mean, because I guess, I shouldn't even say this, but it was the old international dealer, which was right in Durand for years and years, and he always told me, Sig, he said, this business is very cynical and it will always revolve in around a 5-year process. And, I watched that for years and years, and he was right on. I mean, yeah, it wasn't exactly 5 years, but it started going back after so many years, and but we were always convinced that land was not going to get any more plentiful, and people had to eat. So our business would be sustainable one way or another.
Yep.
And we focused on that, and because if we'd listened to people, because when we bought the Durand store, both the manager from the Minneapolis John Deere branch and our banker told us, don't do it. don't buy it. You can't make it. And I love it when people tell me I can't do something because I love
Yeah.
to prove them wrong. And I mean, so many times you kind of don't listen to people. I mean, yes, you have to listen to people to learn, but don't do what they tell you. Do what's in your heart, and 9 times out of 10, you'll make it work. So,
So, the 55 series was relatively successful. Still wasn't super high production just because things were still kind of getting better, but
Right.
you were selling some 55 series quite
Oh,
a bit.
yes.
And you were selling a lot of the Maximizer combines, 9400s and
Yep.
stuff.
Yep.
So that was pretty good. And hay tools, I imagine, were doing
Yes.
strong in that time
Yep.
frame. So what did you think when we'd had the Soundguard cab now for, at that point, 20 years, when they changed and the whole new breed of power started coming out with the 6 and 7,000, and then the 8,000 basically was that changed the entire design of tractors.
Oh, yes, yes. And the 8,000s again, we didn't sell that many, but we sold some. There again, we got to revert back to like the 7,000 series, the 78, 77, 76s. That was our bread and butter
Yep.
during that period. Yeah.
And now that has somewhat changed because in the 90s there, you were selling these tractors to guys, somebody was buying a 7,800, they probably milked 70 cows, right?
Yep.
80 cows, something
Yep.
like that. They were a good sized dairy farmer.
Yep.
And they probably wanted that frame so they had all the PTOs or.
Right, right. And it was also a solid loader tractor if they needed,
Yep.
for their dairy operation. Because that's one thing, let's just go back a little bit about how this all involved. When the 10 series, like the 3010s, 4010s, were introduced, we were fluttering out in the wind here. How do you convince your customers about doing this? I mean, trading into something, you know,
Was
we,
unknown.
but you know what? You know who really helped us the most? Case IHC, International Harvester at that
Yes.
time, because for whatever reason, they were going to scan the countryside with demos with that 3010 against their 460 or 560. Well, here's what happened. There's a lot of people, they still weren't convinced to go from red to green. But you know what they really started thinking about? Man, that thing steered easy, and all of the other features on the tractor wasn't just necessarily what the tractor would pull as far as plows, diggers, and that. It was
Hydraulics.
convenience
Yep.
and
Shifting.
how it was. I honestly feel that that's what really got us started solidly into that new series tractors at the time. And so I never did write them a thank you, but yeah.
But you kind of had to go through that same thing again when you're introducing a whole new design all over again, that the customer is going to be a little leery. But you weren't, by this point, Deere had grown enough that you weren't necessarily just trying to convince the old Deere customers. You had so many new customers.
Yes, yes.
Because your market share, because you said when you started in Durand, you figured the tractor market share of John Deere was only in the single digits. It was
Yeah,
farm
it
alls
was.
everywhere.
Yeah, it was very rare when you seen a new two-cylinder get sold back then out of Durand. Yeah.
And there was, and even Alice Chalmers was strong in the area, and Massey.
Yep.
So
Because we had an Ellis Chalmers dealer just
in Ella.
Ella down here, and Elmwood,
Yep.
Joe Holtz, and he was strong. And
And yet
no,
Harmon in
yeah, Massey Ferguson.
yep.
No, we had a lot of competition back in those days. So, but we got to remember we had a lot more customers.
Yes.
I mean, if you, to be honest, if you lost a deal, there was somebody else you could step right up to and try to convince.
Yep.
You know, you didn't, nowadays, you have to step very lightly with some of these large customers because you can't afford to lose one of those. Because
Yeah.
it could be 10% of your total business.
Well,
And-
yeah.
And so,
So now that's changed from the standpoint of the 6,000s and 7,000s where you were selling so many of them. When you sell a lot more 8-size tractors now because the farms have grown and they went away from dairy and livestock
yeah.
to row crops. When did you start seeing the dairy part of it slowing down? Is that in the 90s when you kind of started seeing where?
Yeah, it would have been somewhere in the early 90s. That's where the consolidations and the growth, the cash croppers started either renting or buying more land, and but that happened fast. I mean, when I say that, simply because when these small dairy farmers found out that their land or their farm was marketable, and back then the young people were not interested in carrying on that tradition just
Yep.
as a tradition because it it just wasn't enough there to sustain a couple of families.
Yep.
So so the young ones went off to college and got an education, and now the father is hitting retirement age, and it seemed like everybody was in that category within about 10 years. I mean, it transitioned so quick. And
So you went from selling primarily like corn planters, you were selling 4-row wides to you started selling 12-row planters within a short time.
yes, yes.
Do you remember the first 12-row planter? Did you order any for stock, 12 rows?
No, I don't think we did. It was still, I mean, the 6 rows were something we'd have our lots full in the spring and hope we sold them, but as you got into this bigger equipment again, I mean,
It
was
cost-
a lot of dollars.
Yeah, that's a lot of overhead to have.
Yep. And so,
And now you almost couldn't order a planter for stock because everybody wants their own.
that's unreal. I mean, you basically start out with a frame
Yeah.
and the planning units, and from there you build it to how the customer wants it.
That's a big difference from when you were ordering a 494 or a 7,000 or
Yep.
And narrow rows really didn't get big around here until 90s, late 80s, really, right?
Yeah. Well, and again, see the problem the problem making that transition, they not only had to change their planters, they had to change their combines and everything else to accommodate those narrow rows. So
Yeah.
it wasn't just the cost of buying that planter. That would have been easy, but so
Well, and when did, because at one point, I'm guessing you sold a ton of 300 pickers and New Idea. Did you sell New Idea pickers too?
yes, we did, even though we were this close to Ella down there, but and old Raleigh Anderson was his name, and he was a competitor in that New Idea field. I
Yep.
mean, and but New Idea, the big thing was pickers and manure spreaders.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah.
So when did it shock you how fast pickers just disappeared? Went from pretty solid, a lot of guys having pickers to just,
Well, I guess yes and no. See, even with the New Idea pickers, we sold several pickers with the sheller
Yep.
unit on instead of the husking bed.
right.
But when these dairies, the small dairies, started going out, now these farmers were raising this corn to sell rather than to
Yep.
feed. So we had to go away from just the pickers. Otherwise, it was another process. They'd pick it, crib it, and then they'd
Shell it
bring
later.
their PTO sheller in, and
Yeah.
so they were all looking for a way to do it easier and faster. So,
Yeah, it was the transition to, I mean, I can still remember as a kid a lot of corn getting picked, and then it just, today it's just
Yeah.
gone.
but there still are a few that high moisture. They'll put a snapper head on their choppers
Yeah.
and take the ear and the
Yep.
kernel. And so,
But yeah, filling cribs, the days of filling cribs
oh,
are just isn't.
that's, yeah, that's,
So that must have been interesting. And then did you start noticing? Do you remember the first? Well, Mill Irons bought a self-propelled chopper from you guys
Yep,
way
yep.
back when.
yes.
But I bet at the time you thought, "Gosh, who's going to buy one of those?" Right? And today, I mean, you guys sell a fair amount of self-propelled choppers and no pull types
Yeah,
because Deere doesn't even offer a pull type, and I think heck, and you guys don't sell New Holland anymore, but I don't think New Holland maybe even does anymore.
I don't know if New Holland does, but yeah, I mean, we still got a pull type to sell, but it's not built by Deere anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Would that be a Dion maybe or
I
something?
think so, yeah.
So, and that was, I mean, pretty consistent business for you guys was, choppers, blowers, chopper boxes. Because chopper boxes were perennial because somebody on these hills would roll a chopper box pretty regular, wouldn't they?
Yeah, but that's history.
Yeah.
I mean, even, going back a few years, we did sell some of the bigger boxes for the self-propelled choppers to where they'd pull them with tractors alongside the chopper, but now it's just about 90+% trucks.
Yeah, yeah.
And
What was the most popular chopper box sold? The Meyer or the Miller Pro or?
well, the Miller Pro is probably what we sold the most of because it was a good box, but it was very competitively priced. Now the Myers was a step up in quality, I guess, if you want to
Okay.
say that. And we were so established, I guess, in the Miller Pro before Myers, you know, before we really got working with the Myers people, that we didn't sell that many of the Myers bots.
Did you sell some Gales?
You know, I don't think we did, because we did have the Gale franchise for
Yep.
a while, but I think by that time that business was so dwindled out, and we had access to these other boxes that we never really messed with that.
And then you had H&S was up at Ellsworth, right? You sold some H&S stuff out of Ellsworth.
We may have, you know, I honestly, that's one I can't, but H&S, the product that they had again it was okay, but it was nothing special. I mean, it went out and did a job, but it wasn't what you call the quality line. I mean,
Yep.
yeah.
So back in the day when you were selling New Holland at 2 stores and John Deere, if a customer wanted a pull-type chopper, what were you going to tell them? Because Deere had a Durand drum, which was...
Yep. Here again, what we would do is we'd still try to find out what they really were looking for and what would work the best for them. Because that was the nice thing about having access to all these different products. You could fit that product into a customer's operation.
Yep.
Much better, because the last thing we wanted any of our salespeople to do is to force something onto somebody, a brand,
Yeah.
because that's what or this store sells and that store don't. We tried to get them what we felt and they felt was the best fit.
Because the Deere chopper worked phenomenal with the Deere tractor.
Yep.
But if you were an international guy, the tractor might struggle a little bit hydraulically.
Yep.
So maybe the New Holland might be a better option for the...
Well, yeah. And, you know, you mentioned that, and that's very true. Sometimes it wasn't the mechanical parts of the unit we sold, but like you're saying, if the customer's a red man and buying a green chopper, we got to be sure that everything fits. Hydraulics,
Yep.
PTO, and everything else. So.
Oh, and that's, while we're in this era of farming, we're in the 90s here. Well, I'm thinking of it. So in the 70s, you know, International had came out with the 86 series.
Yep.
And if you put the 1086 up against the 4440, the 4440 had a lot better things going for it than the 1086.
Yep.
So you had you weren't losing any customers to that 86 series.
No.
But and then the farm economy goes, you know, is bad then, and International introduces the 50 series, the STS, the 88 series tractors. Well, the farm economy is bad, so they're hard to sell any tractors. But when things are recovering, and it's in the 90s, do you remember the Case IH Magnum coming out? They were aggressive selling those tractors,
Yes,
weren't
they were.
So you had some work to do, I would guess, because you had a couple of aggressive Case IH dealers. You had Lapines, which they were the biggest, I think, Magnum dealer in the country.
Yep.
And then you had Volds out of Osseo and Arcadia were pretty strong, weren't they?
Yes. Yes, oh yes, they were very competitive, and the tractor, that thing would go out and perform.
It was a strong tractor, yeah.
Yep, yep.
So were you nervous a little bit as far as, because when they came out, the 55 series are great tractors, but that was an old design at that point.
Yes.
So now you've got to sell the old design versus this pretty strong red one.
Yep.
Was that,
Well, we'd always get nervous when somebody like Case International was going to introduce something because we knew they weren't a slouch. I mean, they were
yep,
going to come with something, and so we just had to keep doing what we were doing very well or better, and somehow I can honestly say, you know, even back in those years, that we very seldom lost a lot of established customers. I mean, whether it was to IHC, Ellis Chalmers, or whoever. And I think it goes because of the service that we had established. But they were definitely a threat, and they were
yeah,
on their mind.
they gained back a little market share in that time frame with the Magnum.
Yes.
And that's the other thing I want in that, because the 90s tractor era to me is fascinating because of the 80s, tractors just stayed the same for a long time. And then in the 90s, things got better. So you're selling New Holland. Now you had just New Holland hay equipment and stuff in Mondovi, but in Ellsworth, you had a tractor contract.
Yes.
So then you probably weren't real concerned about the Ford tractor. You probably liked the Deere tractor, but then the Genesis came out, and that was a pretty strong tractor.
Yep. Yes, it was. But again, the Ellsworth area, I think we were somewhat established with our reputation from the John Deere line, from Durand.
Yep.
You know, before we got the new Genesis tractors, and we didn't sell that many. We sold a few, but I don't know if you ever knew Warren Fox.
Yep.
He worked for us for a long, and he was the kind of guy that could sell a few of those. I mean, and he did, but it seemed like you had to work at selling those, where Deere, the customer knew that's what he wanted. We
Yes.
didn't have to switch him, and he had a mindset. And so a guy should be a psychologist as well as a dealer sometimes.
Yeah. But there were some of those Genesises
Yep.
sold, and they were a good tractor for you guys to sell, right? You didn't have a lot of problems with them.
No, they were a solid tractor. Yep.
Yeah. But Mondovi never had a tractor.
They didn't have the tractor contract, no.
Okay.
See,
Would Deere have said no to you having a tractor contract there at Mondovi, even if you would have wanted it?
I'm not sure that, well, we had a New Holland dealer after Mondovi, just east of Mondovi. This Anderson had the New Holland contract for a while
Okay.
out there. But that would have been after Mondovi got done. But while Mondovi had it, no, because we already got into the time frame where all of these companies, they were looking at market share. That was the one mark
Yep.
that everybody was looking, and so they were very skeptical, you might say, of a dual dealer, because they didn't just want part of that dealer's
Right.
business, they wanted all of their business. And so Deere was very touchy, call it that. And
As a dealer, did that sometimes bother you? Because maybe you had, say, you liked a product from the one company. Maybe Deere was your preference in general, but you liked something that, say, a New Holland or a Shortline manufacturer was selling. Did you feel that it was unfortunate that they were moving to that, where going away from it, you know?
well, we talked about the dairy farms disappearing from the scene. And being a dealer changed totally, you might say, starting in the 90s. And again, I think it was partially because of a turnover of a whole generation of people,
Yep.
whether it was company people or who. The new people getting on the scene had different ideas on how the company should be run and where the focus should be. And we had to account for ourselves in order to protect that contract, because they knew how to get to us, because it was through discounts on equipment. If we didn't make all these quotas in the boxes, you'd get in a lower rate, and then you weren't competitive. So we worked our tail off to make all of our quotas and to adapt to the new way Deere was doing business. And was it good or bad? I don't know. It's been very successful for them.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, yeah. I mean, their market share is
yeah,
strong. I mean, I think they basically have half the market share of the
right.
U.S., I think. So
Yeah,
that had to be, I mean, to see these changes, you had to kind of stay up on top of things in your sales staff to go from, they had done things this way for decades, well, we're going to sell choppers, we're going to sell hay binds, we're going to sell, chopper boxes and feed mills, to suddenly they've got to figure out how to sell 24-row corn planters, and that had to be a tough transition.
yep, yeah. And then, well, a corn planter doesn't sound like a real complicated machine, but and we've always talked about this with the salespeople and also the salespeople with the customers. You get one chance to plant that corn per season.
Yep.
And so it's very important to get it right. And, germination and the number of plants of stand is so critical to get the yields that the customer's got to get. So that corn planter to me is probably one of the most important machines on
Yeah.
the farm. And because whether it's spray or fertilizer, that's very critical also. But if you blurp on the spray or the fertilizer, you can go back and reapply that. But so, yeah, that time consuming. Can you imagine what kind of time it might take to set up a 24 row and all the attachments? I have no idea.
Well, and in the facilities that you needed to have to service the size of equipment, when the big tractor on the farm was a 7800, that was the biggest tractor you were selling.
Yeah.
That's a far cry from what you're selling now. You know, and when a 12-row planter was a massive planter and 24 rows are common, how do you had to add on to some shops and stuff.
Well, yeah, we're in or we did build on to the Chippewa location big time, the service department. We're in the process of building on at our Cameron or Rice Lake facilities, and we're in the talking stages a little bit about the Durand location. Yeah, these buildings, to be honest with you, some of them, even like ours, that's 145 by 145, but that's almost a chicken coop compared to what we really should have.
Well, when you were putting 6,600 combines in there, it was a pretty big shop. But when you're
That's
putting an
right.
X9 in there, it's
That's right, and not just the door widths, but it's the height of the whole
yes.
building, and so yeah, to service this equipment, I applaud these technicians that work every place on these things, because for them to do a major job, well, let's just go back to planters a bit. Talking with the people down here at the store, I mean, we used to sell planters, probably 6-row planters, I don't know, 5, 6, 7,000. Now they tell me they get a planter in to recondition for the spring use, and it'll probably cost 25, 30, 35,000. I mean, so times have changed a little bit, and
Yes, and that's one thing too. And speaking of technicians, years ago when you were a young guy, or just built the new shop there, did you think that you would have a staff that their job is to maintain electronics and the GPS equipment and to have that tech? Because that's a huge part of your business.
oh, that's the other thing. You're right. It's the biggest part of the business, and I'll tell you why. Maybe not in dollars and cents as far as revenue for us, but knowing it, understanding it, being able to diagnose it is the most important part. You can have a $500,000 machine that may be down because of a $30 sensor. And unless that technician knows what to look for, how to look for, and have the testing equipment to do it, you're out in the cold. These guys, when they start on a job nowadays, they don't go to their toolboxes for wrenches. They go to their computers first.
Yeah.
And they figure out what they're going to have to do. And
Well, and that support, and even the GPS support, Deere was probably one of the best things they did for their company, was to invest. They went deep into the GPS stuff, where a lot of the other companies said, we'll buy this
yep.
GPS from somebody else. Deere kind of went in pretty hard on it. And I would imagine the GPS techs don't make the dealership a ton of money, but you have to have them to keep the customer happy.
You gotta have that support for the customers. I mean, to keep the customers.
Yes.
And I won't mention any names, but you just did an interview with a gentleman that switched combines this last year.
Yep.
He wasn't dissatisfied with what he had. He just needed a unit that was compatible with all the
Yep.
rest of his equipment. And that's what's happening. That's why we will invest a lot of money in the technical aspect, because that is the future of this equipment. I mean,
Yeah, and you're not, when you call one of the GPS techs, that's not billable hours for that GPS tech, but it's part of the package. When you're buying a piece of equipment, you're kind of getting that support,
that's right.
and that's why you're paying for it.
Yes, that's correct.
And because if they buy from another company and have no GPS support, no matter how good that piece of equipment is, if it doesn't fit into their operation, it won't work.
Oh, right.
So that had to be a game changer. I mean, that's something you couldn't have seen coming.
Well, Deere was always kind of strong on pushing their dealers, but their dealers didn't really have all of the tools, and by that I mean some of these technical or electronic devices were outsourced or insourced, and Deere didn't have any total control on them, so they couldn't really set up a system to support them the way they wanted to. And now I think they own just about everything they do with these units, so they can put together programs that really benefit not just the dealership but the customer.
Yep.
And so
Well, so we should cover a couple more things before the video gets too long, but I want to ask about some of the merger. So first, before you formed Tractor Central, because it went from Mondovi Implement to Durand Implement to Menominee Equipment. Then you added Arcadia.
and Arcadia.
When did Arcadia come along?
That, I tried to think of the year this morning, but
Was it in the 80s maybe?
pardon?
80s?
Yeah, it would have been probably middle late 80s. Old Emil Benusa owned it, and the store was still downtown,
Yep.
down in Arcadia. And we bought it from Emil, and he had a son, Jack, was with his dad in that business. And those guys, old Emil was a horseman. He'd even trade in a team of horses.
Yeah.
But no, that's when we bought Arcadia and went forward over there. And eventually then we built the new building up not far from Ashley's and the intersection up there,
Yep.
which was a very good move. But and that's been a good store. But before we move on to the merger real quick, you can't believe how different the culture is between Arcadia, Menominee, Durand, and Mondo. They've all, so when you get a group of dealerships like that, you think, well, hey, this is easy. We're going to write a book, and this is our policy, and everybody's going to do everything the same. It don't work that way. I mean, because when you've got a Polish community and a German community, they don't sometimes mix. I mean, they have different ways of going about things.
Well,
And
and the farms are entirely different between the different locations. Like the Durand store is probably about as middle of the road where you have grain farmers. There's still a few small dairy guys. There's
yep,
a little bit of that stuff everywhere where
yep,
Mondovia is bigger dairy. If there's dairy, it's pretty big dairy, right?
yep, yep.
Arcadia is,
They had a lot of dairy farms over there, but those guys, cripes almighty, they live on ground that's
oh yeah,
a pocket gopher shouldn't even live there, but they farmed it all.
yeah,
And they contained the erosion, but the bigger challenge for us was to make our machinery work up on those hills. I
yeah,
mean, it wasn't designed for that.
right?
I mean, most of it wasn't. And so,
Well, and the Menominee store is vastly different than all the others, right? Because
right, there's so much level ground, prairies up there, and
that's large farms. Mostly, it's that business is primarily big farms.
yes, yes.
I mean,
And
because the lease returns, probably half the lease returns that you sell throughout the dealerships probably originate from
yes,
Menominee.
yes, you're right. And yeah, if we took the leasing business out of the Menominee store, it would be a small store. I mean, but it is huge up there because they've got a lot of customers that operate this big equipment, and they do roll it every year or every other year, whatever. And so that's another place we're looking at some more building simply because of all of this equipment that they do prep for the lease people. I mean, they can't do that 1 or 2 weeks before the season's here. They're working on that stuff year round, and when the weather gets bad, so we're looking at things to do there too, because the, the concern with the buildings and the working conditions are either two or threefold. And the reason being, not just do we have to get our equipment ready for the customers, but the working conditions for our employees. We've got to be very concerned about that because to either hire, get, or develop good technicians is next to impossible.
Yep.
And when you can't hire them, if you're going to develop them, that's a long process. When you take a look at our equipment and try to get them trained all the way through the whole, so we've got our own challenges.
Oh, yeah.
There's no doubt about it. And but if we don't look out for the future, then someday we'll fizzle out. Somebody else will swoop in here and buy us out or whatever. But so we'll get back to your subject here, and that's the merger.
Yes, so it's what 2008 or 2009 is when it.
2009, I think, when it was consummated in that time. But that process, that was at least a year-long process before we got it all consummated. We had to go through some real aggressive sessions with not only Deere, but the people we merged with, because this was not a penny ante deal. It was a huge.
Because how many stores?
Well, we had the four, and they had Cameron. They were operating Granton at the time, and they didn't have that many stores.
They had Chippewa too, didn't they?
Pardon?
They had Chippewa though, right?
Yeah, and Chippewa. So it was a total of 7 stores, but it was a lot of money at that time. And we had our goals, and Deere had their goals, because we wanted to make sure we were compatible
Yep.
with that group, and they had the same feeling, and rightly so. So when we did finally agree to it, it was going to be on a 50-50 basis. There were no tiebreakers. I mean, they had 50%, they had their board of directors, and we had. And we did that on purpose because we felt that if we couldn't agree on something, there was a problem.
Yep.
And we weren't going to have somebody out of the blue in our organizations, either side, to step in and say, hey, we're going to do this because I've got the tiebreaker vote. No.
Okay.
So, and that's been good for us. I mean, have we had a few squabbles? Yelling session? Sure. I mean, you don't accomplish anything without doing that sometimes. But no, and then, see, after we got that all done, settled in, and we started doing business, that's when we bought
Granton.
Sheldon.
Grant and Sheldon.
And then we actually, this past year now is when we actually bought the land and the buildings at Granton. So now we've got that as a whole package over there too.
Because that was cool, right?
That was cool, yes. And we've got a building project going on there too, so.
And Dairyland was Sheldon, right? That was Dairyland Implement was Sheldon, right?
Pardon?
Sheldon was Dairyland Implement, right?
Yes, that was, Noel, what was his first name? I'll think of it. But yeah, he was a single dealer, and he was the world's best salesman, I'll tell you what. I mean, he was smooth, easy, and he was a good dealer for what there was, because that's a tough area over there.
That's vastly different than here as far as the farming there.
Yeah,
And even if you take Cameron or Chippewa versus here, you wouldn't think it's that far away that it'd be much different, but they're very different farming.
yeah. And see now, well, our biggest competitor over there now is still Swiderski.
Yep.
He's very strong, and I mean, he does a good job where he takes care of his customers, and but we've done a lot of things at the Sheldon location as far as revamping the buildings. We bought additional land around the building, but our biggest problem at Sheldon is the potential. I mean, to be honest, you know, if we could transition some of those customers to Chippewa and a few of them to Granton, but it's still a place where some of them like to do business, and we've been doing okay up there. I mean, we had, it's been in our discussions about closing that, you know, but right now it's not on our plate
Yep.
for the immediate future, and so
Because those are smaller. That's smaller farms up in Sheldon would be smaller farms up there, and
well, some there's, believe it or not, there's some good sized cash croppers up there
really,
too. Yeah, yeah, and some of this ground around the area, you know, when you get further north, I always think you're getting close to the North Pole. How can anything grow? But they're doing
yeah,
some pretty good yields and stuff. And Jack was the dealer's name
okay,
at Jack Knoll. But he also farmed, and he still, his boy, Chris, is, I think, running the farms now for him. But, and they had quite a few acres. I mean, it
yep,
wasn't, yeah. But so then after that, of course, we've got Arcadia. And like I said earlier, we were downtown and eventually built the new building out there, which was a good thing. But that was a challenge, still is a little bit, because you'd think being up there where the building is, that would be dry, solid ground. But from a runoff standpoint and where the water has to flow, and what the DNR and everybody else says you can or can't do, it gets to be a challenge sometimes to maintain the lot and keep it solid
yep.
for our displays and stuff. But we're making it work, and but see, we bought that lot out there where the new building is in Arcadia. We actually bought that lot from the Ashley people.
Oh,
They owned that at the time. So they still right behind us. They've
yep.
got a warehouse and stuff. So
So when did Westby and West Salem come along?
okay, I even almost forgot about those. And that came last then. We bought those from Frontier, and oh, that's got to be going on 10 years,
Yep.
pretty close. And that's a different farming operation down there. I mean, you know, I
There's
thought,
small dairies yet, right?
yeah, there's some small dairy down there, yes. And see, years ago down in that area, that was big in growing tobacco.
Really?
Oh, yes, there's a lot of tobacco sheds down there standing yet. Yeah, so like I say, we covered just about all the crops.
When you think about it, so Westby would be the furthest south, I think. That's probably further south than West Salem, isn't it?
Yeah, Westby is south of West Salem. West Salem's right on the,
Interstate.
yep,
Yep.
yep.
So from Westby to Sheldon would be the furthest north, right?
Well,
Or Cameron.
distance-wise, it would be further from Westby up to Camden or Rice
Yep.
Lake. Yeah, that's a long ways.
That is a drive.
And but at one time, and that's why I say Deere is concerned about one thing, and that's market share. So if there is an area that's open, no dealership is servicing it,
Yep.
you know, you think right away to yourself, well, geez, if that's available, let's see if we can get it. But you got to be very careful about that, because then they expect you to get the market share there, or
Oh.
it goes against your market share altogether. And so we're, like I said, you got to not only be a dealer, but a psychologist, a scientist would help too.
So you never saw this coming when in 1959 when you moved into the Durand place.
Or when I started as a 15-year-old, if somebody would have described this to me, that this is going to happen in my lifetime, I'd have thought, hey, we're the guys with the straitjackets, because, but yeah, it all happened.
Yeah.
And good, bad, or otherwise, it's, and
And you, there has to be, as much of a challenge as it is to try and deal with the difference in farming here versus there or anything else, you probably, come to appreciate the farming operations and the customers in those different areas that you'd probably never, if you had never gotten any further away than Durand selling equipment,
well, that,
you'd have thought of Sheldon as being some dairy cows in the middle of the trees.
yeah,
And you've got to see that. Or Westby being, small farms and tobacco sheds and,
Yeah.
and those Arcadia guys being, they must be born with one leg shorter than the other so they don't tip over when they walk.
right. Well, but then I mentioned tobacco, like the store out of Granton, they deal with the cranberry people down in
Yeah.
Warrens, and that's a whole different culture. And so, yeah, it's like I said earlier, when we first merged, one of the things we did, and that's one of the things we did wrong, but we did it. We thought, to make this easy, now we've got all these stores, we're going to write a policy, and everything's going to happen the same. Everybody's going to have to adhere to these policies. And there was no way that could work, because what we're talking about, all
Yeah.
the different cultures, it just, and the different types of operations. It's no. So yeah, if I lived to be another 50 years, I don't know what I'd see.
Yeah. To go from, you still got to see horse-drawn equipment that they had switched the hitch on to pull with a tractor being traded in to, autonomous ready tractors today. And that's one thing that scares me. Now, I have a theory that it's good for people to work. People should work. I think it's important. When you talk about all this autonomous technology, self-driving tractors and equipment and everything else, and the consolidation and all this, does it worry you some that that we need some work? We need to do the physical farming, that's kind of all right for us.
Well, as you were talking, I was thinking probably on a whole different level, but one of the biggest changes I have seen, not from the horses to the technology we got, but when this generation, we had, it must have been, I don't know what it was, but there was an era for about, well, it's still going on now, where the young guys did take some interest in these operations. And I think as they seen that these operations weren't just a way of life, they're a business today, it interested some of them, several of them. Now, there was always a condition if they stayed on the farm, or at least I think so, and that was, I'm going to have some say on how we do things. And this new generation is the one that is dictating, mandating all of this, or a lot of this new technology versus doing it the way you always did it.
Yep.
And we're seeing that change because the dad is probably a few years from retirement, and he is listening. If he wants to keep that son or daughter to continue running his operation, he's going to have to let them do it the way they see it should be done.
Yep.
And
Well, there's nothing wrong with
not
getting
at all. But we have to recognize that we're not in an era do business like we always did business, because we may have had this solid customer out here, all green, but his son has got different ideas. He's been exposed to
Yeah.
different things. So that's the thing that we have to really work on and work with these people, because I feel that our organization is as well versed and able to service all this new technology as anybody in the United States. I mean, we've got technicians at that level.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, wrapping it up, as you look back on your career, I mean, 70 years of the farm equipment business, you didn't see certain things coming. Some of this you never could have imagined. And was there anything that you thought for sure that never happened? Like, the changes, whether it be the changes in the dairy industry or.
Well, I'll put it very simply, Ryan. When they put the first man on the moon, that's when I was convinced nothing's impossible. So going ahead, there's things that are going to happen that we never expected to.
Yep.
And that's really, at first, was I skeptical? Absolutely. I mean, even when all these changes in the farms were taking place, and, in your own mind, he's not going to last long doing it that way. But after a few years, watching what was happening, I was convinced change was our future, and we better get on board that wagon or we're going to be left in the dust. And I don't think we ever looked back. we were always, our group, even before we merged, always very aggressive thinking, and weren't really afraid to take a little gamble.
Yep.
And that's really, even this group we're with now, the Cohills, it still was that way after we merged with them. They were on board. They knew the future was out there, but we had to take it. It wasn't going to be given to us.
Yep.
Yep.
So wrapping it up then, is there anything you want to say to all these customers you've had for 7 years and to Deere corporate, because the changes you've seen in the company have got to be amazing.
Well, the big change in the company was our whole operation was based out of Minneapolis up here.
Yep.
I mean, you know, we got our machinery, our parts, our headquarters. I mean, it's so different today. And of course, back then, as we were operating with those people, you knew everybody from the bottom to the top, whether it was to the parts picker or the CEO of the company up here by first name. And now, to me, that's probably the biggest disappointment. There's the personal thing, it's like everything else. The personal thing is gone a little bit.
Yep.
Quite a bit. And not faulting anybody, it's just the way we've evolved into. And but no, after 70 years, there's different people have asked me, and I've asked myself, if I had to do it all over again, what would I do different? I don't know what I'd do different. I'm satisfied with everything I did and everything that's happened. So I'm happy up.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, you've had a good business, good customers, you know, a
and
good line of equipment that, you know, you never had to feel ashamed of selling something that,
right.
you know.
And I mean, we're still so proud of the fact that John Deere always was John Deere, still is John Deere. Nobody's bought them.
Yep.
You know, and as strong as they are, I don't think anybody's going to buy them.
No. All right. Well, thanks, Sig.
Thank you, Ryan. I appreciated this. And I just want to say thank you to all of our past customers.
Yeah. Yep.